The most dangerous jobs in Philadelphia, USA prison. The metal grinder screamed. Sparks flew across the prison workshop floor at Curran-Fromhold Correctional Facility. Behind those chain-link fences and razor wire in northeast Philadelphia, men in orange jumpsuits worked machines most had never been trained to operate. For 14 cents an hour. One slip. One moment of distraction. That's all it takes. But this isn't just about the workshops. The deadliest jobs in Philadelphia's prison system aren't always the ones with heavy machinery. Sometimes the most dangerous place is the kitchen, the laundry room, even the intake cell where you're supposed to be safe. Andrew Drury learned this the hard way. He spent 36 hours in an intake room at Curran-Fromhold in early 2025, waiting for a cell assignment. Just waiting. When guards finally checked on him, he was collapsed on the floor. Dead. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Louis Young Jr. had been locked up at the same facility since December 2021. He had type 1 diabetes, a medical condition the prison knew about, a condition that required insulin, regular monitoring, basic medical care. On November 6, 2023, Louis died from diabetic ketoacidosis. His sons would later file a federal lawsuit alleging the jail withheld his insulin and placed him in a cell where he couldn't access medical care. 2 other inmates had already died the same way. Same facility. Same preventable cause. The city of Philadelphia operates 4 correctional facilities. Thousands of inmates move through these walls every year. Many of them work. They cook the food, clean the laundry, fix the plumbing, weld metal, make license plates. The system calls it rehabilitation. Job training. A pathway to re-entry. But when an inmate gets hurt on the job, there are no worker protections. No OSHA regulations. No workers' compensation. If you lose a finger in a machine, that's on you. If you slip on a wet kitchen floor and end up with an infection that costs you your leg, you might get a few $100s. Maybe. If you're lucky. The Philadelphia Department of Prisons employs approximately 159 inmates through its Philadelphia COR program. 10 different shops. Everything from food production to metal fabrication. Inmates earn between 14 and 42 cents per hour. That's not a typo. 14 cents. But here's what makes Philadelphia different. The danger isn't just in the workshops. In March 2024, a 28-year-old man was found beaten to death in his cell at Curran-Fromhold. He'd been locked up since March 9th. Corrections officers found him on the cell floor around 12:15 a.m. His cellmate was 41 years old. The exact details of what happened remain under investigation. But the pattern is clear. Violence, medical neglect, understaffing. These are the conditions that make every job in Philadelphia's prisons dangerous. Even the job of just being an inmate. This is the story of the most dangerous jobs in Philadelphia's prison system. But it's also the story of a broken system that treats incarcerated people as expendable labor. Where a diabetic man can die waiting for insulin. Where someone can spend 36 hours in intake and never make it to a cell alive. Where beating someone to death carries the same bureaucratic response as a plumbing issue. What you're about to hear is based on court documents, federal lawsuits, investigative reports, and documented incidents. These aren't ghost stories. These are real people. Real injuries. Real deaths. And a system that keeps grinding forward 14 cents an hour at a time.
If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.
The Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center sits in the Holmesburg section of Northeast Philadelphia. Gray concrete walls. Razor wire. Guard towers watching every movement. Inside those walls, approximately 159 inmates report to work every day through a program called Philadelphia COR. 14 cents an hour. That's what most of them earn. The skilled workers, the ones operating welding equipment, running the metal presses, handling industrial machinery, they make 42 cents. After years of good behavior and training, you might reach the top tier, 51 cents per hour. Do the math. Work a full 8-hour shift and you've earned $1.12. Maybe $3.36 if you're one of the experienced welders. A month of full-time work gets you about $67. That's gross pay before the prison takes its cuts for restitution, child support, court fees, and commissary debt. But here's what they don't tell you during intake orientation. When you get hurt on the job, you're not an employee. You're an inmate. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, the federal agency that protects workers from dangerous conditions? Their regulations don't apply inside prisons. Workers' compensation? Not for you. Disability benefits? Keep dreaming. The legal framework is simple and brutal. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime. That exception has been stretched, twisted, and exploited for 150 years. Today, it means that incarcerated people can be forced to work for pennies, in conditions that would trigger federal investigations anywhere else. Philadelphia CR operates 10 different shops inside Philadelphia's correctional facilities. Metal fabrication, welding, furniture manufacturing, food production, laundry services. Each one has industrial equipment, heavy machinery, sharp tools, high temperatures, moving parts that can crush, cut, amputate. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections doesn't release detailed statistics on inmate work injuries in Philadelphia facilities specifically, but national data paints a clear picture. Between 2018 and 2022, California prisons alone reported over 700 work-related injuries to inmates. In Arizona, one egg farm facility where inmates worked recorded more than 250 injuries. These aren't paper cuts and twisted ankles. We're talking about amputations, burns, crushing injuries, deaths. Take the case of Blas Sanchez. He wasn't in Philadelphia, he was at an Arizona prison. But his story reveals the pattern. Sanchez worked at Hickman's Family Farms, an egg production facility that contracts with Arizona prisons for cheap labor. One day in the production facility something went wrong. The exact details vary depending on the source, but the outcome was undisputable. Blas Sanchez lost his leg. Amputated. The result of a workplace accident that would have triggered a major OSHA investigation and lawsuit anywhere outside prison walls. His compensation? A settlement in the thousands. Not millions. Thousands. For a leg. Noah Moore worked at the same facility. He lost 2 fingers. Crystal Allen lost her thumb. These weren't isolated incidents. They were the predictable result of putting untrained or minimally trained people into industrial work environments with inadequate safety equipment and no regulatory oversight. Back in Philadelphia, the work continues. The metal shop at Philadelphia CR runs metal presses, welding stations, grinding equipment. Inmates manufacture furniture, signs, license plates. The food production facility processes meals for the entire prison system. Thousands of trays every day. Industrial ovens. Commercial slicers. Deep fryers. Floors that get wet and slippery from constant cleaning. In 2024, a Georgia prisoner slipped on a wet kitchen floor. Simple accident, right? Happens everywhere. Except this time, the fall resulted in complications. Infection. Medical neglect. Eventually amputation. The inmate lost his leg because of inadequate medical response to what should have been a treatable injury. This is where the danger multiplies in Philadelphia's prisons. It's not just the initial accident. It's what happens after. The medical system inside Philadelphia's Department of Prisons has been the subject of multiple federal lawsuits. Delays in treatment. Failure to provide prescribed medications. Ignoring obvious medical emergencies. Louis Young Jr. wasn't working in a shop when he died. He was just trying to manage his diabetes, a condition that requires regular insulin, blood sugar monitoring, and medical oversight. Basic care that any endocrinologist would consider standard practice. But inside Curran-Fromhold, according to the federal lawsuit filed by his family, Louis couldn't access his insulin. He was placed in a cell where medical staff couldn't adequately monitor him. On November 6, 2023, he died from diabetic ketoacidosis, a completely preventable complication. His sons filed suit in federal court, alleging deliberate indifference to serious medical needs. The complaint noted that 2 other diabetic inmates had died at the same facility under similar circumstances. The city denied wrongdoing. The case continues to wind through the legal system while the jail continues to operate under the same conditions. Here's what makes the work programs particularly dangerous in this environment. If you get injured in the metal shop, maybe you catch your hand in a press or sparks from welding burn your arm, or you slice yourself on sharp metal, you're dependent on that same broken medical system. The same system that let Louis Young die waiting for insulin. The same system that faces constant lawsuits for medical neglect. Amanda Cahill died at Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center in September 2024. She was 42 years old. The medical examiner ruled her death as drug intoxication. How drugs got into a maximum security facility is a question that points to another danger inside these walls. Corruption. The prison isn't just dangerous because of the machinery or the violence. It's dangerous because the systems meant to protect you, medical care, security, oversight, are fundamentally broken. Guards are understaffed. In Delaware County facilities nearby, inmate-on-inmate assaults increased 65% between 2022 and 2023. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections recorded a 33% increase in violent incidents system-wide. When you're working in a prison shop with heavy equipment, you need to trust that security is watching. That if something goes wrong, help will come. That medical staff will respond. But in Philadelphia's prisons, that trust doesn't exist. Because the evidence says it shouldn't. The food service workers start their shifts at 4:30 a.m. They're handling knives, operating industrial mixers, working near open flames and hot oil. One kitchen accident in a civilian workplace might result in workers' comp, paid medical leave, maybe an OSHA fine for the employer. In prison, you might get a few $100s and a transfer to a different job. If you're lucky. If the injury doesn't result in permanent disability or death before medical staff adequately treats you. The welding program trains inmates in a skilled trade. The idea sounds good on paper, give them marketable skills for when they get out. But the reality involves putting people with minimal training in front of equipment that can cause severe burns, eye damage, respiratory problems from fumes. All for 42 cents an hour. All without the safety net that every other American worker takes for granted. In 2025, the Philadelphia prison system faced crisis-level staffing shortages. Corrections officers working mandatory overtime. Facilities operating with skeleton crews. When you don't have enough guards to maintain security, when medical staff are overwhelmed, when the system is running on fumes, that's when accidents turn fatal. Andrew Drury's death in the intake room illustrates this perfectly. He wasn't working a dangerous job. He was just waiting for a cell assignment. 36 hours. That's how long he spent in that room before guards found him collapsed. Dead. A death that should never have happened, that revealed the depth of negligence baked into the system. The inmates working in Philadelphia's your shops know this. They see the patterns. They know that if something goes wrong, they're on their own. But they work anyway. Because the alternative is sitting in a cell 23 hours a day. Because commissary items cost money and 14 cents an hour is better than zero. Because the prison can punish inmates who refuse work assignments with loss of privileges, disciplinary segregation, or other consequences. It's not really a choice. It's coercion dressed up as a jobs program. This is the foundation of the most dangerous jobs in Philadelphia prisons. Not just the work itself, but the total absence of protection. The knowledge that if you get hurt, you're expendable. That your life can be valued at 14 cents an hour. That the same system failing to keep Andrew Drury alive in an intake room, failing to give Louis Young his insulin, failing to prevent a 28-year-old from being beaten to death in his cell, that same system is now handing you a welding torch and calling it rehabilitation. The question isn't whether these jobs are dangerous. The question is, when the inevitable happens, who's responsible? And the answer, over and over again, is nobody. The kitchen at Curran-Fromhold Correctional Facility feeds approximately 3,500 inmates every day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. 3 meals. 10,000 trays moving through an assembly line operated by men who earn less than $1 for their entire shift. It's 4:30 a.m. The kitchen crew is already working. Steam rises from industrial boilers. The smell of scrambled eggs and institutional coffee fills the air. Stainless steel surfaces stretch the length of the room. Commercial ovens, each one large enough to cook for hundreds. Deep fryers that hold gallons of oil heated to 350 degrees. Industrial mixers with blades that could take your arm off if you're not careful. The floor is always wet. Always. Between the constant cleaning required by health codes and the steam condensing from cooking equipment, the tile stays slick. Yellow caution signs sit in corners, ignored by workers who've learned to shuffle carefully in their state-issued shoes. Shoes that aren't slip-resistant. Shoes that fall apart after a few months of daily kitchen work. This is where the danger becomes invisible. It's not the dramatic accidents that get you. It's the cumulative effect of working in a hazardous environment without proper equipment, training, or medical backup. A kitchen worker in Georgia learned this in 2024. The details emerged through legal filings and investigative reports. He was working his shift, moving between stations like he did every day. The floor was wet. He slipped. A fall that happens in kitchens across America every day. Usually it results in a bruise, maybe a workers' comp claim, some paid time off to recover. Not in prison. The inmate hit the floor hard. Pain shot through his leg. He reported the injury to the officers supervising the kitchen. What happened next is where the Georgia case reveals the systematic failure that makes prison work so dangerous. He didn't get immediate medical attention. He was told to finish his shift. The pain got worse. Swelling. Discoloration. Classic signs of a serious injury that needed evaluation. By the time medical staff actually examined him, infection had set in. In a properly equipped civilian hospital with adequate resources, this would have been treatable. Antibiotics. Wound care. Close monitoring. But prison medical facilities are chronically understaffed and under-resourced. The infection spread. Complications mounted. Eventually, doctors had no choice. They amputated his leg. A slip on a wet floor cost this man his leg. Not because the injury itself was catastrophic, but because the medical response was inadequate. Because in the prison system, an inmate's pain isn't an emergency. It's a scheduling problem. Philadelphia's prison kitchens operate under similar conditions. The food service workers handle knives every day. Commercial slicers that can take off fingers in a fraction of a second. They work near open flames. They lift heavy pots filled with boiling water. They operate equipment that requires training most of them never received. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections offers some safety training. A brief orientation. Maybe a demonstration from another inmate who's been working the kitchen for years. But compare that to the training required for food service workers in the civilian world. ServSafe certification. OSHA safety courses. Regular equipment inspections. Immediate access to first aid and emergency medical care. None of that exists in the prison kitchen. In 2023, investigative reporters examining prison labor conditions across the United States documented a pattern. Inmates working in food service reported burns, cuts, back injuries from lifting, respiratory problems from inadequate ventilation. The California prison system alone recorded over 150 food service-related injuries between 2018 and 2022. Those are just the ones that got reported and documented. How many injuries went unreported because inmates knew that medical care would be delayed, inadequate, or non-existent? The kitchen crew at Philadelphia's prisons includes some inmates serving long sentences. They've been working food service for years. They know which equipment is broken. Which fryer thermostat doesn't work right and might overheat the oil. Which mixer makes a grinding sound that means the gears are about to fail. They've learned to work around the problems because reporting them doesn't lead to repairs. It leads to nothing. One former inmate from a Pennsylvania facility described the kitchen conditions in testimony that later became part of a legal filing about prison conditions. He talked about working with a commercial slicer that had a broken safety guard. The guard was supposed to prevent workers from getting too close to the blade. Without it, you had to be extremely careful every time you used the machine. One moment of distraction, one slip, and you could lose fingers. He reported it to the corrections officer supervising the kitchen. Nothing happened. He reported it again. Still nothing. For 6 months he worked with that broken equipment, knowing that any mistake could result in permanent injury. When he finally got released, the slicer still hadn't been repaired. This is the reality behind the statistics. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections reported 1,157 inmate-on-inmate assaults in 2022. That number gets attention. It makes headlines. But work-related injuries? Those disappear into bureaucratic paperwork. They don't generate press releases or reform campaigns. An inmate who loses fingers in a kitchen slicer becomes a line item in a report that nobody outside the system will ever read. The thermal burn cases are particularly brutal. Deep fryers in prison kitchens operate at temperatures that can cause third-degree burns on contact. Commercial ovens reach 500 degrees. Steam tables can cause serious scalding injuries. All of this equipment is operated by workers wearing thin cotton uniforms that offer zero protection. A burn injury in a civilian workplace triggers an immediate emergency response. Paramedics, hospital transport, specialized burn treatment. In prison you might wait hours to see medical staff. The burns might be cleaned and bandaged by someone with minimal training. Infection becomes a serious risk. Scarring is almost guaranteed. Long-term complications from inadequate treatment are common. The food service director at Philadelphia's UR oversees the kitchen operations. But that person isn't a safety inspector. They're not an OSHA compliance officer. Their job is to make sure 10,000 meals get produced every day with the minimum number of workers and the smallest possible budget. Safety is secondary to efficiency. This creates a perfect storm of danger. Inmates who need the money from their kitchen job. Supervisors who need bodies on the assembly line. Equipment that's aging and poorly maintained. Medical care that's delayed and inadequate. and zero regulatory oversight to force changes. The Philadelphia prison system has faced multiple federal lawsuits over medical care. The family of Louis Young Jr. sued over his diabetic care. Other families have filed similar suits alleging deliberate indifference to serious medical needs. Each lawsuit reveals the same pattern: delays, inadequate treatment, preventable deaths. Now imagine you're working in the kitchen. You slip and fall. You feel something tear in your knee. You report the injury. How long until you actually see a doctor? Hours? Days? What happens to that injury while you wait? Does it heal properly or develop complications that could have been prevented with immediate care? Amanda Cahill's death at Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center in September 2024 wasn't work-related. But it revealed something important about security and contraband control. She died from drug intoxication while locked inside a maximum security facility. That means drugs got past the searches, the security checkpoints, the guards. If drugs can get in, what else fails? Kitchen workers handle knives. They have access to potential weapons. Security protocols are supposed to prevent these items from leaving the kitchen. But in an understaffed facility where guards are working mandatory overtime and dealing with constant emergencies, how carefully are those protocols followed? The danger isn't just accidental injury. It's the violence that can erupt when you put stressed, traumatized people in a high-pressure work environment with access to sharp objects and hot liquids. The 28-year-old inmate beaten to death at Curran-Fromhold in March 2024 died in his cell. But the tensions that lead to that kind of violence exist everywhere in the facility, including the kitchens. A fight in a civilian kitchen might result in some shoving. Maybe someone throws a punch. In a prison kitchen, someone might grab a blade. Hot oil becomes a weapon. The closed environment means you can't just walk away. You're locked in with people who might want to hurt you, working with equipment that can be used to cause serious harm. The correctional officers supervising the kitchen aren't trained chefs or food service managers. They're guards trying to maintain order while inmates handle dangerous equipment under stressful conditions. If something goes wrong, an injury, a fight, a piece of equipment malfunctioning, the officer has to make split-second decisions about whether to call for medical help, security backup, or both. Those decisions can mean the difference between a minor injury and a life-altering catastrophe. The inmates working the breakfast shift will clock out around noon. They'll have earned maybe $1, 50 cents, 35 cents. However many hours they worked multiplied by 14 cents. Then they'll go back to their cells and wait for the commissary order that 14 cents won't really buy much of. Maybe some ramen noodles. A few stamps. Definitely not enough to make the risk worthwhile. But they'll be back tomorrow at 4:30 a.m. Because the alternative is worse. Because even 14 cents an hour feels like something when you have nothing. Because the system is designed to give them no real choice. And tomorrow the floor will still be wet. The equipment will still be broken. The medical response will still be inadequate. The danger will still be invisible until someone gets hurt badly enough that it can't be ignored anymore. That's the kitchen kill zone. Not a battlefield. Just an institutional food service operation where human lives are valued at less than the cost of the meals being produced. The welding shop at Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center operates in a converted warehouse section of the facility. High ceilings. Concrete floors stained with decades of metal shavings and oil. The smell of burning metal hangs permanently in the air. This is where Philadelphia COR's skilled workers earn their 42 cents an hour. 20 welding stations line the walls. Each one equipped with torches, masks, gloves, and the kind of industrial equipment that requires proper certification in the outside world. In here, you get a few days of training from another inmate and a corrections officer's approval to start working. The arc from a welding torch burns at approximately 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot enough to instantly cause fourth-degree burns through clothing. Hot enough to cause permanent eye damage if you look at it without proper protection. Hot enough to ignite materials across the room if sparks land in the wrong place. Michael Thompson, not his real name, but a composite based on multiple documented cases from Pennsylvania prison labor programs, started working the welding shop 3 months into his sentence. He was 32 years old. Locked up on a drug conviction. No prior welding experience. The prison's vocational training program promised him a marketable skill for when he got out. The training lasted 1 week. An older inmate showed him how to strike an arc, how to move the torch, how to position the metal. Basic fundamentals. The corrections officer supervising the shop approved him for solo work. Michael started his new job earning 42 cents an hour. 2 months later, a spark from his torch landed on his pants. The cotton prison-issued uniform ignited instantly. Michael dropped the torch and tried to pat out the flames. Another inmate grabbed a fire extinguisher. The whole incident lasted maybe 15 seconds. But 15 seconds is a long time when you're on fire. The burns covered his right thigh and part of his hip. 2nd degree, possibly 3rd degree in some areas. He was taken to the prison medical facility. A nurse cleaned the wounds and applied bandages. No hospital transport. No burn specialist. Just basic first aid and a prescription for antibiotics. Over the next 3 weeks, the burns became infected. Michael repeatedly requested to see medical staff. Each time he was told to submit a sick call request and wait for his appointment. By the time a doctor actually examined him, the infection had spread into the surrounding tissue. He needed surgical debridement, cutting away dead and infected tissue. A procedure that should have been done within days of the initial injury. Michael's case never made the news. It didn't trigger any investigation. He eventually healed, though he'll carry the scars for life. The welding shop continued operating under the same conditions. The same minimal training. The same cotton uniforms that ignite easily. The same delayed medical care. His story represents dozens of similar cases documented across the Pennsylvania prison system. A 2022 investigation into prison labor conditions identified multiple welding-related injuries. Burns. Eye damage from inadequate protective equipment. Respiratory problems from working with inadequate ventilation. Metal fragments embedded in skin. Each injury following the same pattern: minimal training, inadequate safety equipment, delayed medical response. The protective equipment in the Philadelphia welding shop tells its own story. Welding masks with cracked lenses. Gloves worn thin from repeated use. Leather aprons with burn holes. In a civilian welding shop, OSHA regulations require regular equipment inspections and immediate replacement of damaged safety gear. In prison, you work with what you're given until it literally falls apart. The ventilation system is supposed to remove welding fumes and metal particles from the air. But the system in the Philadelphia shop was installed decades ago. It struggles to keep up with 20 active welding stations. Inmates working 8-hour shifts breathe in metal dust, welding fumes, and particulates that can cause long-term respiratory damage. There's no pulmonary function testing. No regular health screenings for workers exposed to these hazards. You sign up for the welding program to learn a trade and earn slightly better pay. 5 years later, you're coughing constantly and don't know if it's from the welding fumes or just prison life. The metal fabrication side of the shop presents different dangers. Industrial metal presses that can exert thousands of pounds of pressure. One mistake, one moment of inattention and you could lose a hand. Grinders throwing sparks and metal fragments. Bandsaws cutting through steel. Drill presses. All operated by inmates who learned the basics from other inmates. Blas Sanchez's case in Arizona became public because his injury was too severe to hide. He lost his leg working at a prison labor facility. But for every case like his that makes it into court filings and news reports, how many lesser injuries never get documented? How many crushed fingers, severed digits, deep lacerations get treated in prison medical facilities and disappear into the bureaucratic void? The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections doesn't publish detailed statistics on workplace injuries broken down by facility or type of work. The data exists somewhere in internal reports and insurance filings. But it's not accessible to the public, to researchers, or to the inmates being asked to do this work. What we do know comes from lawsuits, investigative journalism, and occasional data releases. Between 2018 and 2022, California prisons reported 734 inmate work-related injuries. Arizona facilities recorded hundreds more. These are massive prison systems, similar in scale to Pennsylvania's. The numbers suggest that prison labor injuries are common, predictable, and systematically underreported. In the Philadelphia welding shop, production quotas drive the pace of work. Philadelphia COR has contracts to fulfill. License plates to manufacture. Metal furniture for government offices. The work needs to get done on schedule. When you're being paid 42 cents an hour and you know that production delays might cost you your job assignment, you cut corners. You work faster than you should. You skip safety checks. This is where the coercive nature of prison labor creates additional danger. An inmate can't quit and find a better job. They can't report unsafe conditions to OSHA. They can't organize for better pay or working conditions. The prison controls everything: their housing, their food, their communication with the outside world, their chance at parole. Refusing a work assignment can result in disciplinary action, loss of privileges, solitary confinement in some facilities. Even if an inmate recognizes that the welding shop is dangerous, that the equipment is inadequate, That they haven't received proper training? What choice do they really have? The metal fragments are invisible until they're embedded in your skin. Tiny particles of steel thrown off by grinding operations. They travel at high velocity. They can penetrate exposed skin, lodge in your arms, your neck, your face. In a properly managed metal shop, workers wear long sleeves, face shields, protective clothing designed to prevent penetration. In prison, you're wearing a cotton uniform and whatever protective equipment hasn't fallen apart yet. Noah Moore lost 2 fingers at Hickman's family farms in Arizona. Crystal Allen lost her thumb. Both were working in facilities where prison labor was contracted out to private companies. But the injuries could just as easily have happened in Philadelphia's metal shop. The same equipment. The same minimal training. The same inadequate medical response. The Philadelphia CR program describes itself as vocational training, teaching inmates marketable skills, preparing them for re-entry into society. The marketing materials probably show inmates learning trades, gaining confidence, building better futures. The reality is metal presses with broken safety guards, welding stations with inadequate ventilation, training that consists of watching another inmate for a few days, medical care that turns minor injuries into permanent disabilities. In March 2024, a 28-year-old inmate was beaten to death at Curran-Fromhold. The violence in Philadelphia's prisons isn't confined to cells and common areas. It exists everywhere, including the work areas. When you put people in an environment characterized by constant stress, minimal supervision, and access to tools that can be used as weapons, violence becomes inevitable. A welding torch isn't just a tool. It's a weapon. Metal bars aren't just raw materials. They're potential clubs. The same industrial equipment that's supposed to teach inmates job skills also creates opportunities for violence that wouldn't exist in a cell block. The corrections officers supervising the metal shop aren't safety inspectors or welding instructors. They're guards maintaining order in a potentially dangerous environment. If a fight breaks out, if someone gets hurt, if equipment malfunctions, they're supposed to manage all of it simultaneously while being chronically understaffed. Delaware County facilities near Philadelphia saw a 65% increase in inmate-on-inmate assaults between 2022 and 2023. The violence is escalating. The staffing isn't keeping pace. And the work programs continue operating in this increasingly chaotic environment. The long-term health effects of welding exposure might not show up for years. Manganese exposure from welding fumes can cause neurological damage similar to Parkinson's disease. Hexavalent chromium, released when welding stainless steel, is a known carcinogen. These aren't immediate injuries. They're slow accumulations of damage that might not be diagnosed until long after an inmate is released. At that point, who's responsible? The prison will say the inmate is no longer their problem. The inmate has no workers' compensation claim because they were never an employee. They have no documentation proving the exposure happened in prison. They're left dealing with serious health problems and no recourse. This is the hidden cost of 42-cent labor. Not just the immediate burns and lacerations, but the respiratory damage, the neurological effects, the cancers that might emerge a decade later. All untraceable. All deniable. All profitable for a prison system that gets cheap labor without accountability. The welding shop at Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center will open tomorrow morning. The same broken equipment. The same minimal training. The same inadequate medical backup. Inmates will strike their arcs and start welding. Some of them will get hurt. Maybe just small burns. Maybe something worse. And the system will continue exactly as it is. Because changing it would require admitting that the current conditions are unacceptable. That would require acknowledging that inmates are human beings deserving of safe working conditions. That would cost money. 14 cents an hour. 42 cents an hour. These aren't wages. They're price tags. The cost of a human being willing to risk permanent injury for the privilege of not sitting in a cell all day. That's the metal shop. Fire, metal, and blood. All for less than $1 a day. The deaths don't always happen at the work site. Sometimes they happen hours later, in a cell, while waiting for medical care that never comes. Andrew Drury spent 36 hours in an intake room at Curran-Fromhold Correctional Facility in early 2025. He wasn't working. He wasn't in general population. He was just waiting. Waiting for a cell assignment. Waiting for processing. Waiting in a concrete room with a metal bench and nothing else. When corrections officers finally checked on him, he was collapsed on the floor. Dead. The exact cause of death hasn't been publicly released. But the fact that a man could die in an intake room after 36 hours reveals something fundamental about Philadelphia's prison medical system. It's not just inadequate, It's negligent to the point of being deadly. This is the invisible danger that makes every job in Philadelphia's prisons more hazardous. You can survive the kitchen. You can survive the welding shop. You can avoid the violence. But you can't avoid getting sick. And when you do, you're dependent on a medical system that has proven repeatedly that it cannot or will not provide adequate care. Louis Young Jr. knew he had type 1 diabetes when he was incarcerated at Curran-Fromhold in December 2021. It's not a rare condition. It's a manageable chronic illness that millions of Americans live with every day. It requires insulin, regular blood sugar monitoring, access to medical staff who understand the condition. For nearly 2 years, Louis navigated the prison medical system. He filed requests for his insulin. He tried to manage his condition in an environment designed for punishment, not healthcare. On November 6, 2023, something went wrong. His blood sugar spiked. His body went into diabetic ketoacidosis, a life-threatening complication that occurs when the body doesn't have enough insulin. DKA is treatable. Catch it early, provide insulin and 4 fluids, and patients recover. But according to the federal lawsuit filed by Louis's sons, their father couldn't access his insulin. He was placed in a cell where medical staff couldn't adequately monitor him. The symptoms progressed. Confusion, vomiting, eventually unconsciousness. Louis Young Jr. died from diabetic ketoacidosis, a completely preventable death. The lawsuit alleges that this wasn't an isolated incident. 2 other diabetic inmates had died at Curran-Fromhold under similar circumstances. The same facility, the same preventable cause, the same pattern of medical neglect. The city denied wrongdoing. The legal battle continues. And the medical care at Philadelphia's prisons remains fundamentally unchanged. This is what makes the work program so dangerous. It's not just the risk of immediate injury. It's the certainty that if you do get hurt, the medical response will be inadequate, delayed, or non-existent. Amanda Cahill died at Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center on September 7, 2024. She was 42 years old. The medical examiner ruled her death as drug intoxication. She overdosed while locked inside a maximum security prison. The drugs that killed her had to pass through multiple security checkpoints, past guards, past searches designed to keep contraband out. Her death raises obvious questions about security, but it also raises questions about medical monitoring. Was she showing signs of intoxication before she overdosed? Did anyone notice? Did anyone care? Or was she just another inmate, invisible until she stopped breathing? The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections doesn't release comprehensive data on deaths in custody broken down by facility. But the available information is damning. Across the state system, dozens of inmates die every year. Some from violence. Some from suicide. Many from medical conditions that should have been treatable. A 2019 lawsuit against the Philadelphia prison system detailed horrific conditions. Inmates denied cancer treatment. Diabetics unable to access insulin. People with serious infections left untreated until they required emergency hospitalization. The lawsuit described a medical system characterized by deliberate indifference to serious medical needs. That was 2019. 5 years later, Louis Young Jr. died from lack of insulin. Andrew Drury died in an intake room. Amanda Cahill overdosed on drugs that shouldn't have been in the facility. The patterns persist. 4 inmates working in prison industries. This medical negligence multiplies every workplace danger. Consider the Georgia prisoner who slipped in the kitchen. In a civilian workplace, that fall results in immediate medical evaluation. X-rays, treatment, time off to recover. In prison, he was told to finish his shift. By the time medical staff actually examined him, infection had set in. Eventually, amputation. That's not a workplace accident. That's medical malpractice compounded by a system that treats inmate health as optional. The burn injuries from the welding shop follow the same pattern. Michael Thompson, the composite case based on multiple documented Pennsylvania incidents, suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns. He received basic first aid in the prison medical facility. No burn specialist. No hospital transport. Just bandages and antibiotics. 3 weeks later, when infection had spread through the burned tissue, he finally got the surgical treatment he needed from day one. How much permanent damage occurred during those 3 weeks of delay? How much scarring could have been prevented with immediate, proper care? The medical staff at Philadelphia's prisons are overwhelmed. The facilities are chronically understaffed. Nurses and doctors are managing caseloads that would be considered unmanageable in any civilian hospital. But the difference is that in a civilian hospital, patients can leave. They can seek second opinions. They can file complaints with regulatory agencies. Inmates can't do any of that. They're captive patients in a system that has little accountability and even less oversight. The sick call system creates another layer of danger. If you get injured or fall ill, you submit a request to see medical staff. You don't get immediate care. You get put on a list. That list might be days or weeks long. By the time you actually see a doctor or nurse, a treatable condition might have become a medical emergency. A former inmate from a Pennsylvania facility described the process in testimony that became part of a legal filing. He developed a tooth infection. Painful but treatable with antibiotics. He submitted a sick call request. He waited 2 weeks. By the time he saw the dentist, the infection had spread into his jaw. He needed emergency surgery at an outside hospital. In the civilian world, a tooth infection gets treated within days. In prison, it becomes a surgical emergency because of systematic delays built into the medical system. This affects every work program. The kitchen worker who cuts his hand. The welding shop worker who inhales metal fumes and develops respiratory problems. The laundry worker who strains his back lifting heavy loads. All of them are dependent on a medical system that has proven repeatedly that it will let people suffer and die rather than provide timely, adequate care. The federal lawsuits pile up. The families of dead inmates seek accountability. The city denies wrongdoing and settles cases for undisclosed amounts. And nothing changes. Delaware County facilities near Philadelphia saw that 65% increase in inmate-on-inmate assaults between 2022 and 2023. But how many of those assault victims received adequate medical care? How many serious injuries went untreated or undertreated because the medical system couldn't or wouldn't respond? The violence and the medical negligence feed each other. An environment where people know they can be beaten and left without proper medical care becomes more violent. Inmates can't trust the system to protect them or heal them. So they protect themselves. Which leads to more violence. Which overwhelms the medical system further. It's a death spiral. And the people dying are the ones trapped inside it. The 28-year-old beaten to death in March 2024 at Curran-Fromhold was found on his cell floor at 12:15 a.m. How long had he been lying there? Did anyone hear the beating and choose not to report it? Did he call for help and get ignored? The investigation hasn't released those details. But the fact that someone could be beaten to death inside a locked cell, in a facility that's supposed to be secure and monitored, tells you everything about oversight. This is the context for understanding why prison jobs are so dangerous. It's not just the equipment or the work itself. It's the total absence of a functioning safety net. In the civilian world, workplace safety depends on multiple layers of protection. OSHA regulations, workers' compensation, employer liability, access to medical care, the ability to quit and find safer employment. Inmates have none of that. They work with dangerous equipment, minimal training, inadequate safety gear, and the knowledge that if they get hurt, the medical response might kill them even if the injury doesn't. The statistics from California prisons show over 700 work-related injuries between 2018 and 2022. But how many of those injuries resulted in long-term complications because of inadequate medical treatment? How many workers developed infections, permanent disabilities, chronic pain? Not because the initial injury was catastrophic, but because the medical response was inadequate. Those numbers aren't tracked. Those stories don't get told. The inmate who loses mobility in his hand because a laceration wasn't properly treated becomes a statistic in a report nobody reads. Shauna Lynn Jones was a 22-year-old inmate firefighter in California. She died when a boulder fell on her during a wildfire response in 2023. Her death made headlines because it was dramatic and public. But what about the inmates who die slowly from medical neglect? Where are their headlines? Louis Young Jr.'s death should have been a scandal. A diabetic man dying from lack of insulin in a modern American prison in 2023. That should have triggered investigations, reforms, accountability. Instead, it triggered a lawsuit that the city is fighting. Andrew Drury dying after 36 hours in an intake room should have been a scandal. Instead, it's barely mentioned in local news reports. Amanda Cahill overdosing on drugs that got past prison security should have been a scandal. Instead, it's another death in custody, another case number, another family mourning without answers. This is the invisible epidemic. Not a disease. Not a virus. Just systematic neglect so normalized that deaths from preventable causes barely register as newsworthy. For the inmates working in Philadelphia's Yours shops, earning their 14 cents an hour, this knowledge shapes every decision. Do you report that injury? Do you risk being labeled a complainer and losing your work assignment? Do you push through the pain because you know medical care might not come for days? The system forces impossible choices. Work through the injury and risk permanent damage. Report the injury and risk being ignored or punished. Either way, you're on your own. That's not rehabilitation. That's not job training. That's exploitation backed by the threat of medical abandonment. The welding shop, the kitchen, the metal fabrication area, they're all dangerous. But the most dangerous thing in Philadelphia's prisons isn't the equipment or the work. It's the certainty that if something goes wrong, you're expendable. 14 cents an hour. That's what the system says you're worth. And when you die from preventable causes, the system will deny responsibility, fight the lawsuit, and continue operating exactly as before. Because changing would require admitting that inmates are human beings who deserve basic medical care. And that admission would cost money. Lots of money. More than the system is willing to spend on people it has decided are disposable. Every job in Philadelphia's prisons comes with an invisible cost. You can follow every safety rule. You can master the equipment. You can avoid mistakes. But you can't avoid the violence. The 28-year-old inmate found beaten to death at Curran-Fromhold in March 2024 wasn't working when he died. He was in his cell, locked in with his 41-year-old cellmate. Sometime between lights out and 12:15 a.m., something went wrong. By the time corrections officers found him on the cell floor, he was dead. The investigation hasn't revealed what triggered the violence. Maybe it was an argument. Maybe it was gang-related. Maybe it was mental illness, drugs, accumulated rage with nowhere else to go. The why doesn't matter as much as the what. A man was beaten to death inside a locked cell in a facility that's supposed to maintain security and protect lives. This is the violence tax. The constant threat that permeates every aspect of prison life, including the work programs. You might go to the welding shop to escape the tension of the cell block. But the tension follows you. The gang politics. The debts. The disrespect that demands a violent response. All of it exists in the workshop just like it exists everywhere else. Delaware County facilities near Philadelphia documented that 65% increase in inmate-on-inmate assaults between 2022 and 2023. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections system-wide saw a 33% increase in violent incidents. These aren't abstract statistics. They're stabbings, beatings, sexual assaults, riots. Every number represents someone's blood on a cell floor or a hospital bed. The violence affects the work programs in ways that don't show up in injury reports. An inmate working the kitchen has access to knives. In a civilian restaurant, that's normal. In prison, it's a constant security calculation. Who can be trusted with a blade? Who has enemies in general population? Who's part of which gang? The corrections officers supervising work areas aren't just watching for safety violations. They're watching for violence. For stolen items that could be turned into weapons. For contraband being passed between workers. For the subtle signals that might precede an attack. This creates an environment where the official job, cooking food, welding metal, washing laundry, is secondary to the real work of surviving. An inmate in the kitchen isn't just worried about burns from the deep fryer. He's worried about the guy working next to him who has a problem with his cellmate. He's worried about being in the wrong place when a fight breaks out. He's worried about refusing to smuggle contraband and facing retaliation. The violence isn't random. It follows patterns. Gang affiliations determine who can work where. Debts get settled in the workshops where supervision is lighter than in the cell blocks. Weapons get manufactured in the metal shop and distributed through the work crews. A former corrections officer from a Pennsylvania facility testified in a deposition about the reality of supervising prison work programs. He described being responsible for monitoring 30 inmates in a workshop filled with tools that could be weapons. The ratio made actual supervision impossible. The best he could do was try to spot trouble before it escalated. Most of the time he succeeded. Sometimes he didn't. When violence erupts in a work environment, the injuries multiply. The initial assault. The people caught in the crossfire. The injuries from scrambling to escape. All of it happening in a space filled with hot equipment, sharp tools, heavy machinery. A riot in the kitchen means people running past open flames. Scalding water thrown as a weapon. Knives that were supposed to be cutting vegetables used to cut people. The same environment that poses accidental dangers becomes exponentially more hazardous during violence. The understaffing crisis makes this worse. Philadelphia's prison system has struggled with chronic officer shortages. Guards working mandatory overtime. Posts going unfilled. When you don't have enough officers to maintain security, response times get longer. Supervision gets thinner. Violence has more time to escalate before anyone intervenes. In March 2024, The same month that 28-year-old was beaten to death, Philadelphia's prisons were operating with significant staffing shortages. The exact numbers fluctuate, but reports indicated dozens of vacant positions. Officers were burning out, calling in sick, quitting. The remaining staff were stretched impossibly thin. 4 inmates working in the shops. This means longer periods without officer presence. More opportunities for violence. Less chance of immediate intervention if something goes wrong. The official safety protocols assume adequate staffing. The reality is skeleton crews trying to maintain order in facilities designed for larger complements. The gang dynamics add another layer of danger. Philadelphia's prisons house members of various street gangs and prison gangs. These aren't social clubs. They're hierarchical organizations that control drug distribution, extortion, violence. Work assignments become opportunities for gang business. An inmate might be asked to steal tools from the metal shop. Refusing could mean a beating. Complying makes you complicit in future violence when those tools are turned into weapons. Either choice puts you in danger. The drug trade inside prisons requires distribution networks. Work crews provide opportunities for passing contraband. The kitchen workers can move drugs through the food service. The laundry crew can hide contraband in the clothes. Every work program becomes a potential link in the distribution chain. Amanda Cahill's death from drug intoxication at Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center proves that drugs flow freely despite security measures. She overdosed on September 7, 2024. The drugs came from somewhere. They passed through security. They reached inmates who wanted them. And someone in that chain was probably using work assignments to facilitate the movement. 4 inmates trying to stay clean, trying to do their time without getting involved in illegal activity. The work programs present impossible situations. Say no to the wrong person and you might get beaten. Say yes and you become part of a system that could get you killed or add years to your sentence if you're caught. The violence isn't always physical. Sexual assault in prisons is underreported but well documented. The Prison Rape Elimination Act requires facilities to maintain standards preventing sexual abuse. But standards on paper don't stop predators. Especially in work environments where supervision is limited and power dynamics are extreme. Work assignments can be used to create opportunities for sexual predators. An inmate assigned to work alone in a storage area. A supervisor who looks the other way. A victim who knows that reporting the assault might result in retaliation or being labeled as weak. These cases rarely make it into official statistics. Victims stay silent because reporting in prison can be more dangerous than suffering in silence. The work programs, meant to be productive and rehabilitative, become hunting grounds. The psychological toll of constant vigilance affects everyone. You can't relax in the welding shop. You can't focus entirely on your work. You're always watching. Always calculating. Always aware that violence could erupt at any moment. This stress compounds the physical dangers. A worker distracted by threats misses the safety warning. A kitchen worker watching for gang politics doesn't notice the wet floor until he's slipping. The violence tax gets paid in accidents that wouldn't happen if people could just focus on their work. The retaliation against informants creates another trap. See something dangerous? Reporting it might mark you as a snitch. In prison culture, few labels are more dangerous. An inmate who reports safety violations, stolen tools, or contraband faces potential retaliation that could leave them injured or dead. This silences the workforce. Broken equipment doesn't get reported because reporting draws attention. Safety hazards persist because fixing them would require acknowledging they exist. The system remains broken because the people who could identify the problems are too afraid to speak. The 28-year-old beaten to death in his cell. His cellmate is presumably facing charges. But who else knew there was tension between them? Who saw the warning signs and stayed quiet because intervening would make them a target? How many people carried the knowledge that violence was coming and said nothing because speaking up in prison is its own death sentence? This culture extends to the work programs. An inmate injured by faulty equipment might not report how it really happened. Not because he's covering for the prison but because the full story might involve gang activity, contraband, or other factors that would put him at risk. The official injury reports from prison work programs probably undercount the violence-related injuries. How many accidents were actually assaults? How many falls were fights? How many equipment malfunctions were sabotage? The data doesn't capture this. The statistics count injuries but rarely investigate the context. A burned hand in the kitchen might have been accidental. Or it might have been someone's hand forced onto a hot surface. The medical report won't make that distinction. Braxton Moon, the 21-year-old inmate killed while picking up trash along an Alabama highway in 2019, died when a car hit him. A tragic accident. But the fuller story revealed inadequate safety protocols, minimal supervision, inmates working in dangerous conditions without proper protection. His death was preventable. But preventing it would have required admitting that using prison labor for roadside cleanup was inherently dangerous. The violence tax in Philadelphia's prisons works the same way. Every beating that happens in a workshop could be prevented with better staffing, better training, better mental health care, better gang intervention programs. But implementing those solutions would require resources the system hasn't allocated. Instead, the violence continues. The inmates working in the shops know that any shift could be the one where someone settles a score, where a gang enforces a debt, where mental illness meets opportunity and someone dies. They show up anyway. They work their shifts. They earn their 14 cents an hour. Because the alternative, sitting in a cell with nothing, is somehow even worse than facing the violence tax every day in the workshops. The corrections officers know this too. They see the patterns. They know which inmates have problems with each other. They watch for the signs that violence is brewing. But with understaffing and overwhelming caseloads, they're playing defense, reacting to crises instead of preventing them. This is the cost of running a prison system on a starvation budget. The violence multiplies. The injuries accumulate. The deaths pile up. And nothing changes because changing would require acknowledging that the current system is fundamentally broken. The violence tax gets paid every day. Sometimes in blood on a workshop floor. Sometimes in fear that prevents people from reporting dangers. Sometimes in psychological trauma that lasts long after release. It's the invisible line item in the budget of every prison work program. The cost of putting people in dangerous environments and hoping violence doesn't erupt. The cost usually measured in 14-cent increments, but sometimes measured in lives. The numbers tell one story. 14 cents an hour. 159 inmates employed. 10 Philadelphia CR shops. 700+ work injuries in California alone over 4 years. 3 deaths at Curran-Fromhold from preventable medical causes. A 65% increase in assaults. A 33% increase in violent incidents system-wide. But numbers don't capture what it actually costs to run a prison labor system built on exploitation and negligence. The real cost is measured in permanently disabled workers who will never receive adequate compensation. In families burying loved ones who died from preventable causes. In communities that will receive back men and women broken by a system that called itself rehabilitative while destroying their bodies and minds. Lewis Young Jr. had 2 sons. They filed the federal lawsuit after their father died from diabetic ketoacidosis. They'll spend years in court fighting a city that denies responsibility. Even if they win, even if they receive a settlement, no amount of money brings back a father who died waiting for insulin. That's the real cost. Not the legal fees or the settlement amount. The absence. The empty chair at family gatherings. The grandchildren who'll never know their grandfather. All because a prison system couldn't or wouldn't provide basic medical care to a diabetic man. Andrew Drury's family faces similar grief. 36 hours in an intake room. Dead on the floor when guards finally checked. What was he thinking during those hours? Did he call for help? Did he know he was dying? The investigation hasn't answered these questions. Maybe it never will. His death reveals the systemic collapse. Intake should be the safest part of incarceration. You're not in general population. You're not working. You're just being processed. If someone can die during that supposedly safe period, what does it say about the rest of the system? The 28-year-old beaten to death in March 2024 had a family too. They learned their son, brother, maybe father, was killed in a locked cell. Beaten to death by his cellmate while guards who were supposed to maintain security somehow didn't intervene in time. Amanda Cahill was 42. The medical examiner ruled drug intoxication. Her family has to live with the knowledge that she overdosed in a facility designed to keep drugs out. That the security meant to protect her failed completely. These aren't statistics. They're people. Their deaths represent complete system failures. And the same systems that failed them continue operating without significant changes. The inmates working in Philadelphia CR's shops right now are making the same calculation every day. Is 14 cents an hour worth the risk? Is learning a trade worth working with equipment that could kill you? Is getting out of your cell worth depending on a medical system that lets people die from preventable causes? For many the answer is yes. Not because the deal is fair but because there are no good options. Prison creates artificial scarcity, of money, of activity, of purpose, and then offers exploitative programs as the only relief. This is the real cost. The coercion. The false choice between sitting in a cell 23 hours a day or risking your life for wages that wouldn't buy a sandwich in the free world. Blas Sanchez lost his leg working at an Arizona egg farm. His compensation was measured in thousands of dollars. Not millions. Thousands. For a leg. The settlement probably didn't cover his long-term medical costs. It certainly didn't compensate him for the permanent disability he'll carry for the rest of his life. Noah Moore lost 2 fingers. Crystal Allen lost her thumb. These injuries happened while they were working for private companies that contracted with prisons for cheap labor. The companies got their work done at below-market rates. The workers got permanently disabled. The prisons got a cut of the profits. Everyone wins except the people doing the actual work. The long-term health effects won't show up in any prison statistics. The welders breathing metal fumes for years might develop respiratory disease a decade after release. The kitchen workers exposed to cleaning chemicals might develop chronic conditions. The mental health toll of working in constant fear of violence doesn't appear on any medical chart. These costs get externalized. The former inmate with lung disease from prison welding will be someone else's problem. Medicaid might cover some treatment. Emergency rooms will stabilize him. But the prison that exposed him to the hazard won't be held accountable because the connection can't be definitively proven. This is by design. The system is structured to avoid accountability. Injuries get underreported. Medical neglect gets blamed on the individual. Violence gets dismissed as inevitable. Everything is someone else's responsibility. The families of the dead file lawsuits. The city denies wrongdoing. Cases settle for undisclosed amounts with no admission of liability. The same corrections officials remain in charge. The same policies continue. The same conditions persist. Nothing changes because changing would require acknowledging that the current system is built on exploitation. That calling it rehabilitation while paying 14 cents an hour is a lie. That treating inmates as disposable labor has predictable, deadly consequences. The 13th Amendment's exception for involuntary servitude as punishment for crime has enabled this. For 150 years, prisons have used that exception to justify forced labor, minimal wages, non-existent safety standards. The legal framework hasn't changed. The conditions haven't changed. Only the PR has improved. Modern prison labor is marketed as job training, skill development, a pathway to successful reentry. The reality is industrial accidents, medical neglect, and wages that would have been considered exploitation in 1850. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections could release detailed statistics on work-related injuries. They could implement OSHA-equivalent safety standards. They could provide workers' compensation for injured inmates. They could staff medical facilities adequately. They could pay living wages. They won't. Because doing so would reveal the truth. The current system only works if you treat incarcerated people as less than human. The profit margins require exploitation. The efficiency requires cutting corners on safety. The model requires accepting that some people will be permanently injured or killed. Shauna Lynn Jones was 22 years old when a boulder killed her while fighting wildfires as an inmate firefighter in California. She was doing dangerous work for minimal pay. Work that trained her for a career she couldn't pursue after release because many jurisdictions won't hire convicted felons as firefighters. That's the final insult. The system claims to prepare inmates for reentry. But the jobs they're trained for often aren't available to them. Welders with felony records struggle to find employment. Commercial kitchen workers face background check barriers. The skills training is a facade covering exploitation. The inmates know this. They're not naive. They understand that 14 cents an hour isn't a wage. It's a token payment to make exploitation seem consensual. They know the medical system might kill them. They know the equipment is dangerous and poorly maintained. They know the training is inadequate. They work anyway because prison offers so few alternatives. Because commissary items cost money. Because staying busy helps time pass. Because the alternative is surrendering completely to an environment designed to break you. That's the real cost. Not just the injuries and deaths, but the daily psychological toll of knowing you're trapped in a system that values your labor at 14 cents and your life at nothing. The corrections officers working in these facilities aren't villains. Most are trying to maintain order in an impossible situation. They're understaffed, overworked, dealing with impossible ratios and inadequate resources. When violence erupts, when medical emergencies occur, when equipment fails, they're expected to handle it all simultaneously. The system fails them too. Just differently. Their failure comes in burnout, PTSD, moral injury from working in conditions they know are wrong but can't change. The officers who found that 28-year-old beaten to death will carry that image. The ones who discovered Andrew Drury on the intake room floor will remember. Everyone inside the system pays a cost. The question is whether anyone outside the system cares enough to change it. The legal framework exists for reform. Federal courts have ruled that deliberate indifference to serious medical needs violates the Eighth Amendment. OSHA could extend protections to prison workers. State legislatures could mandate living wages and workers' compensation. None of these changes require new laws, just enforcement of existing principles. But enforcement requires political will. And political will requires public pressure. And public pressure requires people caring about what happens to the incarcerated. That's the hardest cost to overcome, the public indifference to suffering inside prisons. Louis Young Jr.'s death from lack of insulin should have been a national scandal. It barely made local news. Andrew Drury dying in an intake room warranted a few paragraphs in Philadelphia papers. The 28-year-old beaten to death got slightly more coverage, but no sustained attention. These deaths are treated as inevitable. Just part of what happens in prisons. The cost of doing business in a system built on punishment. The public has been conditioned to accept that prisons are violent, dangerous, inadequately staffed places where bad things happen to bad people. This acceptance is the foundation of the exploitation. If the public believes inmates deserve whatever happens to them, there's no pressure to improve conditions. If deaths from medical neglect are shrugged off as inevitable, there's no accountability. If work injuries are dismissed as the price of crime, there's no reform. The real cost is measured in normalized atrocity. In a society that accepts as routine what would be criminal anywhere else. In a system that has convinced itself that people lose their humanity when they're convicted of crimes. The Philadelphia COR program will continue operating tomorrow. The welding shop will open. The kitchen will serve breakfast. Inmates will earn their 14 cents an hour. Some of them will get hurt. Maybe seriously. Maybe fatally. The medical system will fail some of them. The violence will claim others. The equipment will malfunction. The training will be inadequate. All of it predictable. All of it preventable. None of it likely to change. Because the real cost, the cost the system isn't willing to pay, is the cost of treating incarcerated people as human beings deserving of dignity, safety, and fair compensation for their labor. That cost is apparently too high. So instead we pay in broken bodies, preventable deaths, and a system that calls itself justice while operating as exploitation. The final accounting hasn't been done. Louis Young Jr.'s lawsuit continues. Other families will file their own. The legal bills will mount. Settlements will be paid from taxpayer funds. None of it will bring anyone back. None of it will change the fundamental structure. The most dangerous jobs in Philadelphia's prisons aren't really jobs at all. They're survival strategies in a system designed to extract maximum labor for minimum cost while providing minimum protection. The danger isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature. 14 cents an hour. That's what the system says you're worth. And if you die earning it, well, that's just the cost of doing business. The real cost is that we've accepted this. That we've built a society where this happens in our name, with our tax dollars, under our laws. Where people can be worked to death, denied medical care, subjected to violence, all while locked away where we don't have to think about them. That's the cost we're all paying. We just don't see the invoice.